What does Deadpool sound like? See, ask 90% of people that, they're gonna tell you that he sounds like Ryan Reynolds. Because yeah, of course, he's had 2 movies and he's basically the embodiment of the character. Of course he sounds like Ryan Reynolds. But here's the thing, before Ryan Reynolds played Deadpool, what was he supposed to sound like? Because since basically forever in the comics, Deadpool has always had different colored speech bubbles than everybody else in the comic. So usually it's this yellow gradient around the outside of the bubble. But even way back in New Mutants 98, before Deadpool had any of the real factors that make him Deadpool, his speech bubbles were different than everybody else's. So just by like the rules of a visual medium, this should be indicating that he sounds different than everybody else does. And not just in a Batman he's got a deep voice kind of way, but like a he consistently sounds weird. Or maybe if you ask a 2000s kid like myself who played the Deadpool game, he's gonna tell you that he sounds like Nolan North. So I personally always had this question as a comic book fan, and I always assume he sounded kinda diseased. The man's got like stage 11 fucking cancer. Like he is constantly on the edge of death and only being held up by his healing factor. So I'm assuming that his vocal cords are covered in tumors. So I always assumed that his voice sounded like nails on a chalkboard, just rasp and just painful to hear. Just constantly kind of choking in this sort of voice. Which would also explain why most characters don't really want to talk to him that much. Or why everyone is constantly annoyed that he's always talking. So I looked it up, and CBR actually did an article about this where they did some research. Their first source is something that Blind Al said, where Blind Al said that the first time that she met him, his voice sounded wet, like gravel and gasoline. So as visceral as that is, that doesn't super help distinguish what he actually sounds like. Like, it's a really poetic way to describe his voice. You can't really determine if that's high or low or gravelly or smooth. So their next hint comes from something that Cable said, where he said that his voice sounds like a hollow Demi Moore rumble. So what does Demi Moore sound like?
Those of you who don't know me, I'm Demi Moore. I was married to Bruce Willis for the first 3 Die Hard movies, which makes sense because the last 2 sucked.
Okay, that doesn't narrow very much down unless Deadpool actually sounds like a woman and nobody mentioned that to start with. CBR comes to the conclusion that this means that Deadpool has sort of a raspy, gravelly voice. Okay, so a little bit more like a smoker. Sort of a whiskey voice, sort of rasp. Okay, that makes sense. But that's not the end of the story. Because later, comic book writer Fabian Nicieza said that he sounds like Dennis Leary in the 1990s. Or at least that when he was writing Deadpool, that's how he imagined him sounding. So what does 1990s Dennis Leary sound like?
That's the name of my new book, Shut the Fuck Up by Dr. Dennis Leary. A revolutionary new form of therapy. I'm gonna have my patients come in, doctor, shut the fuck up now!
You know, that actually kind of makes sense. Am I gonna hear anything other than Ryan Reynolds when I read the book? No. Not only because I don't have an inner monologue, meaning I don't actually hear the voice, but also that that's his voice now. But I do like the idea that Deadpool has a more raspy or gravelly voice. I don't know, which Deadpool voice do you guys prefer? Smooth Ryan Reynolds or raspy Dennis Leary?